Welcome to the Deep Dive, where today we're going to be taking a journey into the life and crimes of Velma Barfield.
Better known as Death Row Granny.
Exactly right, Death Row Granny. And we're going to be using excerpts from her Wikipedia page as our guide.
Just sort of give us a framework for the conversation.
Yeah, and let me tell you that this deep dive is a wild one.
Oh, yeah.
She wasn't just any criminal.
No.
Velma was the first woman executed in the United States.
After the death penalty was reinstated.
Yeah, in 1976.
Phew, which is a pretty big deal.
You know, that's huge.
Quite a legacy.
Yeah.
Not one you want.
No, not really. And while she was convicted of just one murder,
Just the one.
her confessions revealed a much larger pattern.
Yeah, a pattern of poisoning spanning almost a decade.
Yeah, so to really understand how Velma Barfield became Death Row Granny,
Yeah.
we need to start at the beginning.
Okay, let's do it.
What can you tell us about her early life?
Well, Velma was born in North Carolina in 1932.
Okay.
And her childhood was, well, by all accounts, pretty rough. We're talking an abusive father and a mother who seemed unable or unwilling to intervene.
That's rough.
Yeah, so, this difficult upbringing might offer us some clues as to why she took the path that she did.
It's kind of like you see this early desire to escape this difficult situation,
Yeah.
and you have to wonder if that pattern just repeated throughout her life.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And it's interesting you bring that up because Velma married young,
Oh, really?
just 17, when she married Thomas Burke in 1949.
Okay.
So perhaps marriage was her first attempt at, getting away from this challenging reality.
Okay, so she finds herself in this marriage, and they have two children.
Uh-huh.
Things seem relatively stable for a while.
They do, yeah, even happy.
Yeah, but then there's a shift, right?
Yes, there's a definite turning point.
Yeah.
Velma undergoes a hysterectomy and starts experiencing chronic back pain,
Oh, no.
which is just awful. And sadly, the sources that we have indicate this led to a drug addiction.
That makes sense.
And her personality seems to shift during this period.
And as if that wasn't enough, her husband Thomas starts drinking heavily, and their arguments become really volatile.
Right. Yeah, lots of tension in the house.
So we've seen how her first marriage ended, but her second marriage takes an even darker turn.
Oh,
Get ready for this. In 1969, after one of these heated arguments, Thomas Burke dies.
Dies in a house fire.
Wait, a house fire?
Yeah,
That sounds...
a little suspicious.
Yeah, it does.
Hey.
What are the details surrounding that?
Well, the details are quite unsettling, actually. Velma and the children left the house before the fire started,
Oh, wow.
and Thomas was found dead inside.
So it makes you wonder if this was the beginning of a very chilling pattern.
It really does.
And it's not just speculation, because her second husband, Jennings Barfield,
Who she married in 1970.
yeah, he died less than a year later.
Less than a year after they tied the knot.
Wow.
At the time, his death seemed natural.
Like heart complications or
yeah,
something.
yeah, heart complications, something like that.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really shocking.
Okay.
Years later, they found traces of arsenic in Jennings Barfield's body.
What?
Can you believe that?
Wow, so that completely changes our understanding of what happened.
It really does. It's a game changer.
It's a bombshell.
Total bombshell.
And though Velma denied any involvement in his death,
Of course.
it casts a really dark shadow over everything.
It does. It makes you question every other death in her life.
Absolutely. And the story doesn't end there. In 1974, Velma's own mother, Lillian Bullard, starts experiencing these really severe symptoms.
Oh, no.
Intense diarrhea, vomiting, nausea.
Oh, my gosh.
And she recovered the first time, but later that year she fell ill again and died.
Those symptoms you just described are textbook arsenic poisoning.
Oh, wow.
So this really raises questions about Lillian's death.
It's so disturbing. It's like a pattern is emerging,
Right.
and then her path takes another dark turn because she starts caring for elderly people,
Uh-huh.
and two of them end up dying under her care with similar symptoms.
And with these deaths, the arsenic connection is finally confirmed.
Yeah.
Velma actually confesses to poisoning her mother,
Wow.
one of her elderly patients named Dolly Edwards and John Henry Lee,
Oh, gosh.
who was the husband of another care patient.
So it's no longer a question of if this is happening. It's like a pattern of deceit and poisoning.
Exactly. And the final murder that leads to her arrest really solidifies this chilling pattern.
Yeah, and that would be the murder of her boyfriend, Roland Stewart Taylor Wright.
That's right.
And the details are shocking. She laced his drinks with rat poison,
Rat poison.
claiming she was nursing him back to health.
Oh, my goodness.
But the autopsy revealed a much darker truth.
This detail is so unsettling to me because so many of her victims were people that she was supposed to be caring for,
Right.
her own mother.
Her husband's.
These elderly patients, it's a complete betrayal of trust.
It makes me wonder, was this about control? Was she motivated by financial gain? Was it something else entirely? What do you think?
It's really hard to say for sure. I mean, her actions point to a complex psychological profile.
And after her arrest for Roland Taylor's murder, they exhumed the body of her second husband.
Jennings Barfield.
Yeah, who died under those suspicious circumstances.
Right.
And that exhumation confirmed what a lot of people suspected: traces of arsenic were found in his body.
Wow.
So despite her denials, the evidence against her was really mounting.
Yeah, she's running out of options at this point.
So she ends up in Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, but there was no designated death row for women back then.
You're kidding.
Can you imagine that?
That's wild.
She was held in a unit for escape-prone and mentally ill prisoners.
So she's really isolated.
Must have been an incredibly isolating experience.
Yeah.
And yet, in this isolating environment, she underwent a significant transformation.
A transformation.
She found religion and became a devout Christian, even ministering to other inmates.
It's a really surprising turn of events.
I know, right? Especially considering the nature of her crimes.
Yeah, and get this, even Billy Graham, the renowned evangelist, praised her work with the other prisoners.
That's quite an endorsement.
That is.
And there were attempts to commute her sentence based on this newfound faith.
Oh, wow.
A psychiatrist even testified, suggesting she might have dissociative identity disorder.
Did?
Yeah, possibly stemming from past abuse.
Okay, so a clemency plea is basically a formal request to reduce or change a sentence.
Right.
And often this is based on mitigating circumstances, like potential abuse.
Right.
Leading to did.
It's a fascinating argument.
It is.
It makes you think about the complexities of the human psyche.
For sure.
But in this case, the judge wasn't convinced.
Really?
He didn't accept the D-Day diagnosis
He didn't buy it.
and remained unconvinced that this other personality, the one she called Billy, was actually responsible for the murders.
This is interesting because it speaks to a larger debate about did,
Right.
was this Billy persona truly in control,
Right.
or was it a convenient narrative? It's something that I think we should dig into a little bit later.
Definitely. But for now, we're left with the reality that her execution date was set.
Okay.
However, her case continued to stir up controversy, particularly surrounding the governor at the time, Jim Hunt.
Okay.
Hunt was in a really tight race for the U.S. Senate against Jesse Helms,
Yeah, very contentious election.
and his decision to reject Velma's clemency plea was seen by many as a purely political move.
So it was a decision that likely helped his campaign, but it really ignited this debate about the role of politics in capital punishment.
It's like you're dealing with justice politics and public perception all at once.
All rolled into one.
And then you have this label attached to her death row granny.
Right.
It's fascinating how that moniker really captured the public imagination.
It did.
Was it a way to reconcile the image of a grandmother with the nature of your crimes, or did it contribute to a harsher judgment?
It's definitely a question worth considering.
So with all this swirling around her, Velma Barfield's final days approached. On November 2, 1984, she became the first woman in over 2 decades to be executed in the United States.
Her execution marked the end of a complex and tragic story,
Definitely.
one that continues to raise questions about justice, morality, and the human capacity for both good and evil.
And we're just getting started. In part 2 of our deep dive, we're going to explore the lasting impact of Velma Barfield's case
I'm ready.
and what it reveals about the criminal justice system's treatment of women who commit these kinds of violent crimes.
Okay.
We'll also delve into the psychological complexities of her story and examine the potential role of trauma and mental illness in her actions. Stick with us. There's much more to uncover.
I can't wait. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life and crimes of Velma Barfield.
As we were preparing for this episode, something that really struck me was this jarring contrast.
Yeah.
You have the brutality of her crimes, and then this image of her as this devout Christian on death row. How do you reconcile those two things?
It's a question that stays with you, right? It forces you to think about redemption, the possibility of genuine transformation, even how faith can be used in different ways.
Exactly. Was this newfound faith a sincere expression of remorse, or was it a calculated attempt to avoid execution? It's something I'm still grappling with.
And it goes beyond Velma Barfield herself, right?
It's right.
It asks us to look at how we as a society view the intersection of faith, crime, and punishment.
Right.
Do we believe that someone can truly repent even for the most heinous acts?
It's heavy stuff, for sure.
It is.
And it makes me think about the media's role in all of this.
Yeah.
Velma Barfield's story, especially that death row granny moniker,
Mm.
it captivated the public. Do you think that played a role in how her case was perceived?
Absolutely. I think the media played a significant role in constructing her narrative, and, it's worth exploring how that narrative might have influenced the legal proceedings and public opinion.
Do you think the fact that she was a grandmother, someone typically seen as a nurturing figure,
Yeah.
made her crimes seem even more shocking and unforgivable?
It's certainly possible. I mean, there's often this societal expectation that grandmothers are kind and loving.
Right.
So when someone who fits that archetype commits these violent acts,
Uh-huh.
it can really challenge our understanding of good and evil.
And speaking of societal expectations, one thing that stood out to me in the research was how Velma's crimes seemed to play into these gender stereotypes.
Okay.
She targeted people she was in a caregiving role for,
Right.
which aligns with these traditional notions of women as nurturers.
That's a really interesting observation. It makes you wonder if those societal expectations, whether consciously or unconsciously, played a role in her actions.
Right.
Did she feel trapped by those expectations? Did she exploit them to gain the trust of her victims?
It's hard to know for sure,
It is.
but it highlights this complex relationship between individual psychology and the broader social forces that shape our lives.
Right. It's not a simple equation.
And with Velma's case, I think it's essential to consider how race might have factored into the equation. As a white woman in the South, she may have been treated differently than a black woman accused of similar crimes.
Right. You can't ignore the historical and ongoing realities of racial bias in the justice system.
We have to look at how both race and gender might have influenced the perception and prosecution of her case.
For sure.
So shifting gears a bit,
Okay.
I want to talk about the larger implications of her case.
Yeah.
Because remember, she was the first woman to be executed in the U.S. after the death penalty was reinstated.
A landmark event.
It's a landmark event. It really reignited this national debate about whether the death penalty should be applied equally to women.
Mhm.
It challenged people to consider the historical context of gender inequality.
Yeah.
And how that might factor into sentencing.
Right.
And it wasn't just about gender equality.
Yeah.
It also raised questions about how society views women who commit violent crimes.
Yeah.
Was there a sense that women who kill are somehow more monstrous than men who do the same?
I think that death row granny label really fed into that. It played on those anxieties about women who defy societal norms, especially those related to motherhood and caregiving.
So her case really became this focal point for these complicated issues of gender crime and punishment.
It forced the legal system and society to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we perceive and judge women who commit violent offenses.
And we've talked about the societal and legal implications,
Uh-huh.
but let's delve into the psychological aspects of Velma's case.
Okay.
The psychiatrist who evaluated her suggested she might have dissociative identity disorder.
Right.
If true, that would have had huge implications for her legal defense.
The question of mental illness in criminal cases is always a tough one.
Yeah.
It raises questions about accountability, culpability, and the legal system's response.
Uh-huh.
In Velma's case, the judge ultimately rejected the DZ diagnosis.
But it makes you think, right?
Yeah.
If she did have D, that would change how we understand her actions,
Mm-hmm.
her motives, and ultimately our responsibility.
It adds another layer of complexity to an already complex story.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about the limitations of our legal system when it comes to dealing with mental illness in a criminal context.
So much to unpack here.
There is.
We've talked about Velma's early life, her crimes, the media frenzy, the social and legal implications, and the psychological questions.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still more to explore.
Right.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll look at the ethical dilemmas surrounding capital punishment, and we'll delve into the debate about its effectiveness as a deterrent.
Okay.
We'll also touch upon our enduring fascination with true crime.
Yeah.
What does it say about us? What draws us to these stories? Make sure to stick around for the final chapter of our Velma Barfield deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent the last two parts really kind of getting into the weeds of Velma Barfield's case.
A woman whose story continues to raise questions even decades later.
For sure. And as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think we should shift our focus to some of the bigger picture stuff that her case brought to light,
Okay.
specifically the ethical dilemmas surrounding capital punishment.
You're right. Regardless of your personal stance on the death penalty, Velma's execution was a pivotal moment in American history, and it really kind of reignited the debate about whether capital punishment is ever justified.
Yeah, it's a conversation that we're still having today.
Absolutely. We're still grappling with the morality of the death penalty, its effectiveness as a deterrent, the possibility of wrongful convictions.
Yeah, the emotional toll of capital punishment is something I think about a lot.
Yeah.
It's not just the person being executed who suffers, but their families, the families of the victims, even the prison staff.
It's a deeply traumatic experience for everyone involved, and it makes you wonder if seeking retribution, even for horrific crimes, actually serves justice or just creates more pain.
Throughout our discussion of Velma Barfield, I've been thinking about our cultural fascination with true crime.
Uh-huh.
Why are we so drawn to these stories of darkness and violence?
I think on some level, true crime taps into a primal fear of the unknown.
Yeah, like that unsettling realization that terrible things can happen even in seemingly ordinary lives.
Mm. Exactly. We try to make sense of the darkness, search for logic in the face of senseless violence.
So by exploring these stories, we feel like we're gaining some control over those fears.
Maybe, yeah, learning how to spot danger and protect ourselves.
But I also think there's an element of wanting to understand the human psyche. What drives someone to do such extreme things?
Right. It's like solving a puzzle, trying to piece together the fragments of a crime and figure out the motivations.
And maybe by understanding those motivations, we can help prevent similar tragedies from happening.
That's an optimistic way to look at it. But I think we also need to be mindful of the ethical implications of our true crime consumption.
Right.
Are we exploiting these stories for entertainment? Are we becoming desensitized to violence? Are we losing sight of the real human cost?
Those are important questions. And honestly, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to engage with true crime thoughtfully, to remember that these aren't just abstract stories. They're real lives with real consequences.
Yes. Right as we explore these dark corners of human experience, we need to do so with empathy, respect, and a genuine desire for justice.
Not just for the thrill of it.
Exactly.
So as we conclude our deep dive into Velma Barfield's life and legacy, I want to leave you with this. The search for understanding is a process, and there are rarely simple answers when it comes to human behavior.
But by engaging with these difficult stories, wrestling in the tough questions, we can broaden our understanding of ourselves, our society, and the forces that shape our lives.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. Challenging assumptions, sparking new insights, and encouraging us to keep asking questions even when the answers are hard to find. Thanks for joining us.